All right, let's dive right into one of the biggest mysteries out there. How does the actual physical stuff in your head, your brain, create your entire inner world? We're going to break it down by exploring three huge ideas from cognitive neuroscience that are trying to answer just that. I mean, really think about that for a second. It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? How does this 3-pound lump of tissue, just a bunch of cells and electricity, give rise to everything? Your ability to recognize a friend, your sense of humor, your deepest thoughts? All of it. This question is the starting point for our entire journey today. So to even begin to tackle that massive question, we first need a blueprint. How is the brain even organized? What's the floor plan look like? Well, that brings us straight to our first big idea, the architecture of our thoughts, or what scientists call modularity. So the classic idea, which came from a philosopher named Jerry Fodor, is that some parts of our mind are basically specialized little tools. You can think of your ability to understand language, for instance. It's a module. It works super fast, totally on its own, without you having to think, okay, now I will process grammar. It just happens. That old school view basically saw the mind as a kind of mental Swiss Army knife, a whole bunch of separate tools, each with one specific job. But our understanding today is, well, it's way more dynamic. We now see the brain less like a toolbox and more like a flexible, super connected network, where different expert regions team up and rearrange themselves depending on what you're trying to do. So why the big change in thinking? Well, a few game-changing discoveries really shook things up. Did you know your brain literally rewires itself when you learn something new? That's neuroplasticity. And we realize that complex thoughts don't just live in one little spot. They're the product of many different regions, all talking to each other in these huge distributed networks. It's just a much more fluid, interactive picture of the brain. Okay, and here's a perfect example of how this all works together. You're scrolling through your feed, right? A specialized, almost automatic module in your brain is instantly recognizing the shapes of the letters on the screen. But, and this is the key, to get whether that post is sarcastic or genuine, that little module has to plug into this huge network that understands social cues, memory, and emotion. It's the specialist and the team working hand in hand. So if the brain is made of these specialized regions that all connect into networks, the next obvious question is, how do we find them? How do we actually draw that map? And that leads us perfectly into our second big idea, the incredible challenge of mapping the brain. The journey to map the mind has a pretty wild history. It actually started with phrenology, this bizarre idea that you could figure out someone's personality by feeling the bumps on their head. Yeah. Thankfully, we got a lot more scientific. By the late 1800s, researchers like Broca and Wernicke were making real breakthroughs by studying patients with brain damage and linking a specific injury to a specific problem, like being unable to speak. Fast forward to today, and we're not just looking for single spots. We're mapping the brain's entire, unbelievably complex web of connections. But here's the thing. Mapping the brain is really, really tricky. There's this huge logical trap that scientists have to avoid called the reverse inference problem. Basically, it means this. Just because a certain brain area lights up when you feel, say, happy, you can't just assume that every time that area lights up, someone is feeling happy. Why? Because that same area might also be involved in processing a reward, or remembering a good meal, or a dozen other things. And this leads us to a perfect real-world test. We've all seen headlines like this, right? Scientists find the part of the brain for generosity. It sounds so simple and clean. But now that we know about the reverse inference problem, should we really buy it? Exactly. You got to pump the brakes. That so-called generosity center, it might also light up when we're just bonding with a friend or even when we're just thinking about getting a reward for ourselves. The brain is the ultimate multitasker. It reuses its parts for all sorts of jobs. A single spot almost never does just one thing. Okay, so all this talk about brain maps and what parts are active, it begs a really basic question. How on earth do we see any of this happening in the first place? Well, that brings us to our third and final big idea, the amazing technology that lets us actually peek inside a living, thinking brain. Now, there's no one magic tool that shows us everything. Each one has its pros and cons. Think of it like this. fMRI gives you this gorgeous, super detailed map of where the action is happening. But it's slow. It's like a picture with a long exposure time, so you miss the exact timing. On the flip side, you have EEG. It's all about timing. It can track brain activity down to the millisecond, which is incredible, but it's terrible at telling you exactly where that activity is coming from. And then there's TMS, which is a whole different beast. It actually lets us safely and temporarily disrupt a tiny part of the brain to see if it's truly necessary for a certain task. It's a way to test cause and effect. And this stuff isn't just stuck in research labs. Picture a tech company testing out a new app. They could totally use EEG to watch a user's brain activity in real time as they navigate the interface. A sudden burst of electrical activity could be a clear signal that the user just got confused or frustrated. I mean, that's incredibly valuable feedback for making a better product. Phew. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from the brain's basic architecture to how we map it to the tools we use to see it. So let's pull all these threads together and, maybe reimagine how we think about our own brains. So if you're going to remember just a few things from our conversation today, make it these four. Number one, your brain is a team of experts. It has specialized parts, but they work together in these flexible, dynamic networks. Two, our mission to map the brain has come a long way, from feeling bumps on heads to analyzing mind-bogglingly complex connections. Three, the tools we use to see the brain are amazing, but they all have blind spots. No single tool tells the whole story. And finally, and this one is huge, the next time you see a headline that says scientists found the love spot or the hate spot in the brain, be skeptical. The real story is always more complicated and honestly a lot cooler. And all of this leaves us with one last, really deep question to chew on. As this map of our brain gets more and more detailed, are we also, in a way, creating a map of the self? A blueprint for what makes you, you? That's some serious food for thought. Thanks for joining me.